So in the previous part, we have developed all the required services for our project. So we have developed the product service, the order service, and the inventory service. But what is still missing is like we don't have the services communicating with each other in our project, right? Usually in a microservice architecture, if I open the architecture diagram again, we want our services communicating with each other, right? So this kind of communication can be of two types, as I've already mentioned before. It can be of type asynchronous communication or asynchronous communication. So let's have a look at this kind of communication in detail. So we have our order service, and imagine that we want to make a call to the inventory service whenever a customer places an order. We want to check whether the product is in stock or not, right? So for that, our order service will make a call to the inventory service. It will make a HTTP request, and the inventory service will respond status of the product, whether the product is in stock or not. So based on this response, the order service will either place the order successfully, or it will throw an exception or show an error message that the product is out of stock to the customer, right? So this kind of communication where the service A is talking to service B and is waiting for the response from service B. So this kind of communication is called as a synchronous communication. So the exact opposite, where order service will make a request to the inventory service and it doesn't care about the response from the inventory service, then this kind of communication is called as asynchronous communication. So it's kind of a fire and forget pattern where the service A fires a request for service B and it won't care about the response from service B. So this kind of request, like the synchronous communication, is usually done through the HTTP clients, right? So the HTTP clients we have in our Spring Boot ecosystem are the REST template class, which comes by default in the Spring Boot framework. And we also have another alternative called as web client. So this web client class is coming from Spring Web Flux project. We can either use REST template or web client, but if you open the documentation of REST template, you can see that it is as of 5.0, Spring Framework 5.0, the REST template class is in maintenance mode. So Spring Boot is recommending to use web client as an alternative because it has a more modern API and it also supports synchronous, asynchronous, and streaming scenarios. So for this reason, we will go ahead and use web client to make a synchronous request from order service to the inventory service. So let's go ahead and implement this in our project now. So I'm inside the project. So let's so to be able to call the inventory service from the order service. So first let's open the order service class. And here, while placing the order, we want to make a call to the inventory service. So let me add a comment here. Call inventory service and place order if product is in stock, right? So we want to implement this functionality now. So for that, as we have said before, we are going to use web client. So for that, let's first create a new package inside the order service package called as config. And in here, I'm going to create a new class called as web client config, right? Let me add this class to my Git repository. And I'm going to add a configuration annotation on top of this class because as we are going to maintain the configuration about the web client class, so that's why I created a new class. And inside this web client config class, I'm going to define a bean of type web client, right? So for that, I'm going to add the bean annotation and type in public web client. And you can see that we don't find the web client class because this is not part of the Spring MVC project, but this is part of the Spring Web Flux project, right? So to be able to use Spring Web Client in our project, we have to add the Spring Web Flux dependency to our order service. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open the pom.xml file, and right below the Spring Boot Starter Web, I'm going to copy this dependency information and just going to press enter and paste in the text I've copied. So instead of typing Spring Boot Starter Web, I'm going to say Spring Boot Starter Web Flux, right? If you type in, IntelliJ will already show us the recommendation. I'm going to just select the Spring Boot Starter Web Flux dependency, and I'm going to select on and click on this Load Maven Changes icon so that IntelliJ will download this dependency to our project. So once the dependency is downloaded, you can see that the red text around the Spring Boot Starter Web Flux is gone. That means the dependency is downloaded successfully to our project. And now let's go ahead to the web client config class and continue what we were doing before. So let's try to import this web client class from Spring Framework Web Reactive Function Client package. So you can see that this web client class is now available in our class path. And I'm going to call this method name as web client, and in here I'm going to type in return web client.builder.build, right? So what this will do is it will create a bean of type web client, and we are going to define that bean with the name of web client, right? So whenever we add a bean annotation, this bean will be created with the name of the method name. So whatever method name you have given, it will create the bean with this particular name, right? So if you want to use this particular web client bean inside the order service, we have to define this web client bean with the same name. So I'm just going to copy this web client name and go back to the order service. And now I'm going to inject this web client into our order service class by typing private final web client and just paste in the web client reference variable name. And now inside the place order method, I'm just going to type in just below the comment, I'm going to type in web client dot get, because the inventory controller, if you open the endpoint inside the inventory controller, you can see that we are exposing a get endpoint, which will take in a SKU code as the path variable, and it will return a Boolean variable as a response. So for that we have to make a get call. So I'm going to type the get method, and in here I have to pass in the URL of the inventory service, right? So as we already know, inventory service is running on port 8082. That means I have to add the URL as http localhost 8082/API/inventory, right? So we're going to make a get call, and to be able to retrieve the response, I'm going to type in the method name dot retrieve. And for the web client, we also need to add define what is the type of response we are returning from the inventory service, right? So for that I can type in body to mono. So mono is nothing but a data type in the reactive framework. I'm not going to go into the details of what is mono. To be able to, so just you have to know that to be able to read the data from the web client response, you have to add this body to mono method, and inside this body to mono method we have to provide the type of the response, right? So we are returning a Boolean value as a response. So for that I'm just going to type in Boolean dot class, and finally by default web client will make a synchronous request, right? But we have to make a synchronous request. So to be able to make a synchronous request with web client, we have to add one more code, we have one more line of code called as dot block, right? So if we add this piece of code, then web client will make a synchronous request to http localhost 8082 to the inventory endpoint, right? Because I think I've got the syntax wrong. We should not provide the URL inside the get method, but we have to add another method called as .url, .uri, and then we have to provide the actual URL we want to call, right? So it should be like web client.get URI and then retrieve the response. So now we have to save this response into a local variable. So I'm just going to introduce a new local variable called as Boolean, and I'm going to call it as result, right? And if this result is true, that means if the product is in stock, then we have to place the order, or else we have to throw an exception, right? So for that I'm just going to type in if result then order repository dot save order, else throw no illegal argument exception, and I'm going to type in product is not in stock, please try again later. Alright, so we are not yet done with the implementation. You can observe that our inventory controller is expecting a SKU code as a path variable, right? So for whatever product we want to make inventory check, we have to pass in the SKU code also as part of the GET request. But here is one tricky thing. So if you observe the order object, you can see that each order can have multiple order line items, right? And each order line item contains a SKU code. So for example, if a customer orders 100 items as part of the order and it contains 100 SKU codes, should we make 100 calls to the inventory controller? Does it make sense? No, right? Because making 100 HTTP calls is very time consuming, and the request will also take a lot of time for the customer. The request processing will also take lots of time, right? So for that, what we can do is we can collect all the SKU codes which are present as part of the order, like take it as collect these SKU codes as a list, and then we can provide this list to the inventory service API, right? So we have to make the changes in the inventory controller. So instead of taking one string, one SKU code as the parameter, we have to take multiple SKU codes as a parameters, right? And this is how the usual HTTP request looks like if you are using so this is how it looks like. The HTTP localhost 8082/API/inventory and iPhone 13 would be the SKU code. And what happens if you send multiple values as part of the path variable? So this looks something like this, right? iPhone 13, iPhone 13 red, right? This is how the path variable format looks like. And what happens if we want to display it like a request parameter? So instead of path variable, we can also choose to define this as a request parameter, right? So in this case, the request parameter looks something like this, right? The SKU code equals iPhone 13 and SKU code equals iPhone 13 red. So for each element inside the list, it will create a separate request parameter and it will append it to our URL, right? I would like to go with this format because this is a more readable format, right? You can see that we have two different request parameters instead of the first one where we are just appending all the values with a comma, right? So for this reason, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the path variable. So I'm just going to remove everything inside the get mapping definition, and I'm also going to remove the path variable and add the request param annotation, and I'm going to change the string to a list of string, right? And I'm also going to import this list from Java util package, and of course the inventory service will complain that this SKU code should be a string instead of a list of string, right? So for that, I'm going to also change the is in stock method inside the inventory service from string to a list of string, and I'm also going to import the class list from Java util package. And similarly, I'm also going to do a change for the find by SKU code method, right? And in the Spring Data JPA, we want to find the inventory, which we have to find all the inventories with this given SKU code, right? So instead of find by SKU code, I want to type find by SKU code in, and I want to provide all the list of SKU codes. Of course, this method does not exist yet, so I'm just going to create this find by SKU code in method, and this find by SKU code in method should return us a list of inventory objects, right? So we are providing a list of SKU codes, and Spring Data JPA will return us all the inventory objects which match this SKU code, right? So I can remove the first find by SKU code method as we are not using this anymore, right? And I'm going to go back to the inventory service, and now the is present method doesn't make any sense because we are returning a list from this find by SKU code in method, right? Now what we have to do is we have to also change the return type of this is in stock method, right? Before we are just returning a boolean, but now we have to return the stock information for each SKU code, right? So for that, what I will do is I am just going to remove the is present method, and I'm going to type in .stream, and now I'm going to map this list of inventory objects which are coming as a response to a different type, right? I'm going to create a DTO called as inventory response. So first I'm going to create a map method, and in here for each inventory I'm going to create a inventory response object. So for that, first I have to create the inventory response class inside the inventory service project. So I'm going to create a package called as DTO, and inside the DTO I'm going to create a class called as inventory response, right? I'm going to add the data annotation from Lombok, all aux constructor, no aux constructor. I'm also going to add the builder annotation, and inside the inventory response I'm going to have two fields, private string SKU code and private boolean is in stock, right? We are going to store the information about the SKU code and whether the SKU code is in stock or not, right? Go back to the inventory service, and inside the map method I'm going to type in inventory response dot builder dot SKU code, and I'm going to type in inventory dot get SKU code, right? And coming to the is in stock boolean variable, I want to check whether quantity of an inventory, right? So I'm going to type in inventory dot get quantity, and if this quantity is greater than 0, then we can say that the product is in stock, right? So I'm just going to add greater than 0, then it will return a boolean variable whether the quantity is in stock or not. And finally I'm going to type in the build method. So in this way we have created the inventory response object, and we want to send this as a response, send this as a return variable from our is in stock method, right? So for that I'm just going to type in .toList, and I'm going to remove the brackets here and also remove the semicolon. So in this way we will return the list of inventory response from our method, and instead of boolean we have to change the return type as list of inventory response, right? Now you don't have any compilation errors, and what we have to do is now we have to adapt also our inventory controller is in stock method. So I'm going to go open the inventory controller and change the return type also here from boolean to list of inventory response. So we are taking the list of string as request parameters, and we are passing this SKU code list of string into the is in stock method and querying the repository to find out all the inventory objects for this given SKU code, and then mapping the inventory objects to the inventory response object, and then finally we are sending this list of inventory response object as the response, right? I hope this is clear. Now the next part is we have to call this new enhanced get endpoint from our order service. Right, now inside the order service, and now what I want to do is I want to first collect all the SKU codes from the order object, right? So for that what I can do is I can type in order dot get order line items list dot stream dot map, and for each order line item I want to map order line item dot get SKU code, and I can replace this lambda with a method reference. So I'm just going to replace lambda with method reference, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect this to a list. Now what I have is, if I try to store this into a local variable, I will get a list of strings, right? So I'm going to call it as SKU codes. Now I have a list of SKU codes with me, what I have to do is I have to enhance this web client API call to include this request parameters SKU codes as the request parameters, right? So for that, what I can do is right after the URI, I can type in URI builder, and I can type in URI builder dot query param. Let's add this in a new line so that it's visible. So as a query param, I'm going to provide the SKU code, right? So call it as SKU code, and I'm going to provide the list of SKU codes as the value, right? And I'm going to finally call build method so that the web client will build the URI with the query parameters as SKU code. So in this way, as you have said before, web client will construct the URI in this format. So it's not SKU code with hyphen, but it's going to construct it as SKU code with capital C, because as we have provided the variable name as capital C, so this is going to construct the request in this format. So now once we have made the call, we have to also change the return type of this get request, right? We are not returning Boolean as a variable anymore. We are returning an inventory response, right? So to show this inventory response inside the order service, we also have to create the inventory response class inside the order service, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open order service, and inside the DTO, I'm just going to copy this inventory response and paste this inside the DTO package. So if you're confused why I'm creating this inventory response class one more time, because this inventory response, we have created it inside the inventory service, right? The class inside the inventory service, we cannot access it inside the order service. So that's why I'm duplicating this class inside. I'm also creating this class inside the order service. So now let's go back to the order service class. Instead of Boolean, I'm expecting a list of inventory response object, right? So I can also define this inventory response list as an inventory response array. So for that, I'm going to type in inventory response array dot class. So in this way, web client will parse the response to an array of inventory response objects and will provide it as a result, right? And we are getting a compilation error because we are trying to assign the result of this web client call to a Boolean variable. So instead of Boolean, I'm going to call it as inventory response array. So let's also rename this variable as inventory responses, or maybe inventory response array. And now we have to verify whether the products are in stock inside the each inventory response or not, right? So for that, I'm going to say inventory response dot stream, and what it will do is it will create a stream from the array, right? Using the rs.stream method, it will create a Java 8 stream from the array so that we can easily call the all match method, right? And I'm going to type in inventory response dot is in stock, and I'm going to replace this lambda with a method reference, and also I'm going to store this inside a new local variable, and I'm going to call this local variable as all products in stock, right? Let's step back and see what we are doing here. So we got this list of inventory response array. We are converting it to a stream, and we are calling the all match method from Java 8. It will check whether the is in stock variable is true inside the array or not. If all the elements inside the inventory response list contains is in stock as true, then it will return as true. Even if one of them is false, we will get the all products in stock as false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this all products in stock and replace it with the result. And if all products are in stock, then we are going to save the order to the database, or else we are going to throw a exception. I hope this is clear. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart the order service. So open the order service and click on this rerun order service button. And also for the inventory service, I'm going to open the inventory service, go to console and click on the button again, rerun inventory service application. So once both the inventory service as well as the order service is up and running, I'm going to open Postman, and I've already created a request here. So I'm going to make a call to localhost 8081 API order. This is going to be a post request, and inside the body, I'm going to provide two items, right? Inside the order line items. One is going to be iPhone 13 and one is going to be iPhone 13 red, right? So iPhone 13 red is, we have set the quantity as 0. If I open the inventory application, and here you can see that for iPhone 13 red, we have set the quantity as 0, and for iPhone 13 we have set the quantity as 100, right? So if we try to place this order, we should get an exception, right? So let's try to see whether we are getting an exception or not. I'm going to click on send, and yes, we did get the exception. Let's go to the console and see whether the exception is correct or not. So you see that we are getting a response like product is in stock, please try again later. Product is not in stock, please try again later, right? So let's try again with a happy path. So I'm just going to clear this console, go back to the Postman client, and now I'm going to remove this iPhone 13 red object, right? So let's check whether we are able to place the order successfully or not. I'm going to click on send again, and now you can see that order is placed successfully. That means our order service is able to successfully communicate with the inventory service, and we are making it happen only with the one REST API call, right? We are not making multiple API calls, we are making only one REST API call. So with this, we have completed the development of our services. In the next part, we will have a look at the Spring Cloud ecosystem and how we can introduce the services in the Spring Cloud to our project, right? So I'll see you in the next video. Until then, happy coding techies.